April 22, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Brian Pillman terrible auto accident. WrestleMania 12 buy-rate pancrase pay-per-view debut. World Wrestling Peace Festival update and more. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228. April 22, 1996. Brian Pillman was thrown 40 feet out of the open-air military vehicle he was driving on April 15 and at press time was hospitalized in Cincinnati with multiple fractures and lacerations. Pillman, 33, ran off the road on Kentucky Route 338 and struck a tree stump, then went across the roadway into a field where his van overturned and he was thrown 40 feet from the vehicle according to 3 witnesses, who estimated his driving speed at 60 to 70 miles per hour in the 45 zone. Pillman was listed in critical condition on April 16, but his condition was said not to be life-threatening and there was no speculation about the status of his wrestling career. There were no other details available at press time. Pillman was the main player in one of the strangest wrestling angles in history, strange because nobody really knew where it was going and how it was going to resolve, and strange because WCW and Pillman at the beginning of the angle attempted to work everyone, including their own front office and wrestlers on the angle where Pillman feuded with Booker Kevin Sullivan. From a wrestling career standpoint, the timing of his injury couldn't have been worse. Pillman's contract with WCW expired this week and there was dialogue going on regarding a new deal, but this will no doubt make WCW a lot more skeptical. He had also reached an agreement with ECW where he would work for that group provided he didn't reach a deal with WWF or WCW, including building to a match with Shane Douglas, which obviously would have to be on hold as well. It appears that WrestleMania 12 did approximately the same level of buys as last year's show, although what that level actually is and remains a subject of widespread discrepancies. However, the WWF did shatter a record 1 week later by drawing a 4.7 rating unopposed for the April 8 edition of Monday Night Raw, which featured the television return of the Ultimate Warrior and Shawn Michaels vs. Jerry Lawler and Vader vs. Yokozuna matches. The latter figure, which amounted to 3.05 million homes, was the second largest audience from start to finish average ever to see a pro wrestling television show in the history of cable television, trailing only the 1988 Royal Rumble, which was a USA Network special that year to go head-to-head with the NWA Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view show, which averaged 3.2 million homes on an 8.2 rating. Since so many fewer homes had cable in 1988, it would have been the most viewers for a regular weekly wrestling television show in the history of cable television, although not the highest rated as in the early and mid-80s. When fewer homes were wired, pro wrestling was routinely the top-rated show of any kind on cable and routinely drew ratings that would be considered way off the charts today. It destroyed the all-time record for a Monday Night Raw show of a 3.9 that the show hit twice in the spring of 1995 for Undertaker vs. Jeff Jarrett and Diesel vs. Bam Bam Bigelow main events. WCW has had a few Clash of Champions specials, including the last one, peaked with more homes during the latter stages of the show and even during entire hours, but never averaged as many viewers over a 2-hour period as Raw did over the 1-hour period. The last time a regular cable show broke the 4.0 barrier and the only 2 times previously in the 1990s were in 1990 when WCW did twice on a weekend in February when the Saturday show did a 4.0 and Sunday a 4.4 for Ric Flair vs. Brian Pillman and Flair and Arnold Anderson vs. Rock and Roll Express matches. While going unopposed during a time when wrestling is on a hot streak helped, both WWF and WCW in previous unopposed positions did 3.6 and 3.7s respectively. It is no doubt the debut of Warrior that put the show over the top, much as the debut of Elizabeth for WCW led it to set its company viewership record in January. It was a one-time curiosity about seeing a star from the past who had disappeared for years. Only a small percentage of fans actually order pay-per-view events. Raw was probably seen by 8 to 10 times as many people as Mania, so for most it was their first chance to see Warrior. The WWF took excellent advantage of its largest Raw audience ever with one of its best shows ever. The company shot angles to heat up the upcoming Shawn Michaels vs. Diesel and Ultimate Warrior vs. Goldust pay-per-view matches on April 28. They also built farther into the future for an eventual pay-per-view match with Vader vs. Yokozuna that will likely take place in May or June, and Ahmed Johnson vs. Davey Boy Smith, which will be a house show program for May and no doubt hit pay-per-view at some point. The momentum carried them through April 15, where a stronger Raw show started evenly but eventually pulled away in the second half to beat a live WCW Nitro from Charleston, West Virginia with a 3.1 rating and 4.6 share to Nitro's 2.8 and 4.3. The Nitro replay did a 1.0 rating and 2.8 share. Both shows tried to get the jump, with WCW starting at 8:56 p.m. and immediately putting Hulk Hogan in the ring and starting what turned out to be a pathetic handicap match. WWF started at 8:57 p.m., its new scheduled permanent starting time, and went right into a Mark Merrow vs. Leif Cassidy match. Both shows were tied over the first 30 minutes, but Raw continued to grow throughout, while Nitro plummeted, falling nearly a full point behind during the Randy Savage vs. Bobby Eaton match. WCW picked up greatly during the Sting and Luger vs. Flair and Giant match, which closed the gap on Goldust vs. Savio Vega and the Bret Hart interview, but couldn't come close to making up the 0.9 it fell behind during the third quarter hour. The far more important figure is the buy rate for WrestleMania. WWF is claiming a slight increase over last year, claiming a 1.7 buy rate and 430,000 buys, which would be very successful. However, they had previously claimed 460,000 buys for last year. Now the figure claimed is 425,000, a show which at the time was considered a huge disappointment, and industry-wide the figure going around for WrestleMania 11 was a 1.3 buy rate, which would be 325,000 buys. The figures going around for this year's show industry-wide are a 1.2 buy rate, or about 300,000 buys, which would be a company gross of approximately $4 million. Titan sources claim those figures to be way low. TCI, the nation's largest cable company, reported national figures for WrestleMania as dropping from a 1.1 for last year's show headlined by Lawrence Taylor, to an 0.9 for the 1996 version. Using anyone's figures, it's a revenue drop from last year because the price was lowered from $34.95 to $29.95 with roughly the same number of buys. Using Titan figures, the company revenue decrease over last year is $900,000, while other estimates place the decline closer to $1.1 million. It's probably not nearly as negative as that makes it out to be, only because last year, because of Lawrence Taylor, the expectations were so high, and when it didn't deliver, it led to some major belt tightening. This year, with expectations lower going in, even if the results were a slight disappointment, it's exceedingly doubtful it's going to lead to any kind of a budget crunch later in the year. The debut of Pancrase in what appeared to be the first form of pro wrestling as a legitimate sport ever on pay-per-view on April 13th was a double-edged sword. It was largely well received but went almost entirely unnoticed. While no buy rates are in, based on response here and overall lack of any base audience, none of the sex appeal of watching what your imagination tells you all-out brawling actually looks like that made UFC the rule breaker in pay-per-view, and overall lack of visibility. It appears the sampling group, even at the $9.95 price, was small. What they missed were 6 matches, taped January 28th in Yokohama, that had both a look and feel of being legitimate sport. My impression watching the matches is that they were all shoots, as even the 2 attempts at doing moves that don't hold water, Guy Mesner doing what Don Wilson called a movie kick and Takakufu doing a pro wrestling drop kick, legitimately were clearly showboating, similar to the kind of posturing and winding up in boxers do that falls more in the realm of trying to entertain the crowd as opposed to doing something that will lead to a victory in the ring, and in both cases the announcers immediately pointed them out to the audience rather than tried to cover them up, something that never happens during botched and time spots in pro wrestling. The wrestlers certainly appeared to be squirming too hard and working too hard in a legitimate fashion to be in something where they knew the outcome, particularly the grueling 23 minutes main event match between Minoru Suzuki and Frank Shamrock for the King of Pancrase Championship. The match was much better technically, far faster paced, thus more grueling from a cardiovascular standpoint on both men, and more exciting than similar length UFC matches such as Gracie Shamrock, Severn Toktarov, or Toktarov Shamrock, although it couldn't come anywhere near the drama level of Toktarov Abbott. Frank Shamrock's post-match show of emotion at being presented the championship belt pulled off something Shawn Michaels attempted but couldn't do at WrestleMania, and this is get over just how important the championship belt was to him, which may be the difference in earning something through athletic ability as opposed to earning something through entertainment ability. While Pancrase falls under the large umbrella that is pro wrestling in Japan, in this country it more resembled a mix between sport judo, with aspects of amateur wrestling and some striking techniques thrown in. The fighters were incredibly skilled and conditioned, far more than what we've seen in UFC and its clones or anywhere else within the realm of pro wrestling. They seemed to work hard at a goal of winning the contest as opposed to entertaining the audience. Was it a good show? Very good for what it was. There was nobody out there who didn't belong, which can't be said about some participants in the past in UFC and its clone-type events. Only one match was one-sided, Guy Mesner versus Gregory Smeet, where even Shamrock and commentary criticized Smeet for not trying anything in the match, also unlike most UFC matches and its clones, which are often quick mismatches. Is it marketable in the United States? Doubtful on 2 levels. First, it needs to be in a position where an audience can check it out, and pay-per-view isn't that venue without having first built a base audience through television or other outside hype, which basically didn't exist for this show. Second, it needs to capture enough people's interest and create stars in this country. My feeling based on response here is that virtually everyone who saw the show both liked and had more interest in Pancrase when the show was over than when the show started. It appeared about half those calling had seen Pancrase videos beforehand and knew basically what they were going to see, and thus there were no surprises as to what the product is. The other half, having seen it for the first time, appeared to also go in with a good idea of what it was and enjoyed the techniques displayed and the detailed explanation of them and the strategy employed by Ken Shamrock, who did an exceptional job of educating the audience with his commentary. They also appeared to like that the matches appeared to be real, as not one person that called complained believing the wrestlers were working the matches, although one pro wrestler did call and said he thought the matches were all shoots but that he believed the main event finish was a work, which is unlike the response for any UFC event. Even though there is no working involved in UFC, there are always people, usually who either are pro wrestlers or watch the event with pro wrestlers, who fervently believe it is. But aside from people who already had a good idea what it was they were going to see, the sport appears to be too technical for the masses, which means it would be great at a monthly 90-minute special on ESPN2 like a high-ranking karate or judo tournament, but I'm not sure if it could advance much past that level. Perhaps it would be different if this came from the same evolutionary process that hit Japan, starting with a more realistic version of pro wrestling in a group that has numerous big-name pro wrestling performers with a large following. If enough fans still watch Hogan with the crap he does in the ring just because of his name, they'd probably follow a Maeda-level performer, if there was someone of that caliber, and their friends, as they took pro wrestling in a new direction. After 5 years of that, going legit wasn't as much of a stretch, especially since the early matches, like in early UFC when the skill level wasn't as high, were quick and dynamic. The following built and would at least be the base to carry over at the point Pancrase has reached now, when you have a group of guys who all are familiar with one another and know what to avoid from them, the result being matches even more technical that are harder to finish. The highlight after every match was Shamrock, with telestrator in hand, explaining while watching the video both in regular speed and freezing it at key points exactly what every key move either attempted or succeeded at doing. They also imparted bits of strategy used that one wouldn't know had they not been a participant, such as not going for any submissions while near the ropes, even though if successful. You can get a point, because you don't want to show your opponent your best move so he knows what to avoid if you have a chance to do it in the middle where you can get a submission. Shamrock's downside as a commentator was an uneven level of enthusiasm. At one point after a few matches where he came across as a matter-of-fact professor of pain in a 2-hour submission clinic, he showed enthusiasm that came off as forced in a segment, running down the enthusiasm that came off as hitting his stride in the main event. It's a hard balance, particularly in a show where the announcing is done after the fact in studio as opposed to live, but an announcer can feed off the enthusiasm of a crowd. It's even harder where the crowd noise isn't high. After all, they didn't do any crowd sweetening, which in hindsight, I think was the right move. Don Wilson, who had enough knowledge of martial arts and wrestling to do an adequate job as host, was clearly, due to Shamrock's all-around knowledge, content to play the role of asking the expert the questions. If Semaphore Entertainment Group does continue in its plan to run future Pancrase events, here are a few suggestions. 1. Follow the lead of pro wrestling in areas that it can be learned from, the biggest one being hyping of shows. No pro wrestling pay-per-view event or house show ever draws based on the quality of the show. It sells based on the quality of the hype. You can't hype UFC or Pancrase with interviews like Hogan does because it doesn't work in something that sells itself on reality. But you can do Bret Hart-style interviews. Boxing doesn't draw based on what people perceive to be a competitive fight. It draws when famous personalities, usually media creations, are matched against one another. Put 2 evenly matched middleweights on pay-per-view that nobody knows, or put Otani and Liger in a US pay-per-view main event, and they may give you the most competitive fight of the year. Put a joke like Foreman in the ring with Tyson and the fight will be crummy, but it'll make $1 bazillion. Both groups need a venue to get the personalities over of the top fighters, which is easier said than done. The Shamrocks, Funaki, Mesger, Ilusha all have a marketable look and a skill level to live up to the hype, but unless they are capitalized in promotion of the event, they may as well look like the Wolfman in Smoky Mountain Wrestling for all the good it does. 2. Cross-promote. There is plenty of time on a UFC event between matches, and use that to do interviews and personality profile videos of the stars of Pancrase, giving the date and the match lineup and hyping what you can expect to see from those matches. I couldn't believe with Shamrock right there doing commentary that they didn't take time between matches or after the show for him to do a hard sell interview, and show a taped interview with Severn, and a promotional video of the two men training for the UFC main event match, which is a month away. If they run alternate months on pay-per-view, they can use one event to logically promote the other until they become sister promotions, which will slowly result in the UFC audience being more in tune to the skill level, which inevitably creates more interest in pancrase. Having the fighters go back and forth creates interest as well, as they can introduce a Boss Rutan or a Frank Shamrock into UFC and they'll have some name value and create curiosity going in, or vice versa. 3. They need to establish more of the personalities of the fighters. Just a graphic with height and weight and age is better than nothing, and quite frankly, better than WCW did in a similar situation, but that's about it. Shamrock's commentary was successful in avoiding the nameless, faceless Japanese syndrome, which is why the New Japan wrestlers, as talented as they are, can't draw on pay-per-view for WCW. 4. During the show, do pre- and post-match interviews with the English-speaking fighters, particularly the main eventers. Announce what the card is at the start of the show and what to expect from each match, that way the card will naturally build. This pay-per-view announced the main event early in the show, but you had no idea how many matches or who would appear or knew anything about the people you'd see until they were in the ring. It would have added a great deal to do what UFC does: air a profile, an interview, and air past clips of the fighter as they come to the ring. In the case of the main eventers, you can air some finishes of their important wins and losses of the past. One thing that appeared to be avoided in commentary was any reference to Suzuki's win over Ken Shamrock, perhaps because of Shamrock's title as Superfight King of UFC. To the UFC fan watching this, that would immediately create an aura in Suzuki because he did something the toughest guys in UFC couldn't do. It also makes the brothers' victory both more impressive and more dramatic. In sports, the storylines are often more effective in marketing than in pro wrestling, which has control of its storylines, because the storylines delve in reality. Every sport, no matter what its size, has its storylines. They just have to get them over to the public so they know them and get intrigued by them as well. Perhaps the single thing that bothered me the most was the parental discretion warning before the show. Pancrase is a controlled sporting event, and if it isn't, they are far more skilled at an important aspect of working, making people believe, than they possibly could be given the limited experience of most of them. No different from judo or amateur wrestling. UFC has the potential for out-of-control violence, so the warning fits, even if the legislation is largely ignorantly conceived. But pro wrestling, with its chair shots and simulated brawling and no parental discretion labels, until recently with the WWF events, as things that would be far more objectionable to kids than anything in pancrase, which, with the sportsmanship, holding back in the submissions as to not injure the opponents seriously before they tap, is basically wholesome. Granted, the very technical strategic fights would have virtually no interest to children, but the warning, no doubt insisted upon by the cable distributors, didn't fit the event. We've got a nearly complete card for Slamboree on May 19th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The top two singles matches will be Sting versus the Giant and Conan defending the U.S. title against Jushin Liger. There will be a match for the Cruiserweight title, but Shinjiro Otani isn't booked on the card. The remainder of the card will consist of 8 supposed blind draw tag team matches, with the 16 winners going on to a battle royal, the winner of which will get a title shot at Ric Flair or whomever holds the title on the June pay-per-view show in Baltimore. As has already been released, 2 of the matches are Kevin Sullivan and Chris Benoit versus Public Enemy, and Hawk and Lex Luger versus Animal and Booker T. We've got 4 other matches: Stevie Ray and Bubba Rogers versus Scott Norton and Ice Train, Alex Wright and Disco Inferno versus Dick Slater and Bobby Eaton, David Finlay and Steve Regal versus VK Wall Street, and Jim Duggan and Booty Man and Rick Steiner versus Craig Pittman and Scott Steiner. 2 more tag matches will be available in a few days, and both Ric Flair and Randy Savage will be involved in those matches. We've got a lineup update regarding the World Wrestling Peace Festival, which will now officially take place on June 1st at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. There had been some discussions regarding changing the date until later in the year, but by the time the reports had surfaced publicly regarding that, the decision not to do so had been made several weeks earlier. The wise decision has been made not to attempt to hold the event at the Outdoor Coliseum, which holds 90,000 fans, and move it indoors to the Sports Arena, which legitimately drew 16,742 for its last pro wrestling sellout in 1993. 5 matches have been added to the show: Lex Luger versus Masa Saito, The Giant versus Sting, Tatsumi Fujinami versus Black Cat, Antonio Inoki and Dan Severn versus Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Craig Pittman, and Great Sasuke versus Alex Wright. The 5 previously announced matches have gone unchanged, and they currently stand as Akira Hokuto and Lola Gonzalez versus Bull Nakano and Nephili, Dos Caras and Hector Garza vs. Grand Marcus Jr. and Dr. Wagner Jr., Octagon and Ultimo Dragon vs. Heavy Metal and Psicosis, Atlantis and El Hijo del Santo vs. Silver King and Negro Casas and Conan and Pero Aguayo vs. Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr. On paper, it's an impressive display of international top stars and legends from various forms of pro wrestling, although on paper there are both strengths and weaknesses to the show. As mentioned many times, it appears to be something that will be difficult to market, at least to the casual WWF/WCW type wrestling fan. Los Angeles has been successful in the past and at times shockingly successful at promoting shows aimed at the Mexican-American audience, and this card in some ways is the most marketable show ever aimed at that audience since it has the top stars from both AAA and EMLL together. In addition, there is a very large Japanese-American population in Los Angeles, and this is the first time a show featuring so many major Japanese names has been held. In the 60s, Japanese wrestlers such as Rikidozan and Giant Baba drew sellouts in the top babyface position in Los Angeles, but occasional appearances by the likes of Baba or Antonio Inoki in the 70s, and even once in the mid-80s, didn't seem to draw appreciable increases at the gate nor large contingent of fans from Japanese nationalities. The belief has always been that transplanted Mexicans remain fans of lucha libre because it's more of a cultural thing as compared with transplanted Japanese. Bob Cartago, a former WWF promoter in California, has been hired to promote the event, and they are also going to add Japanese and Mexican marketing specialists to the promotional staff. Commercials and advertising is expected to start as soon as this coming week, and that day will be declared as the Day for Racial Harmony and Peace in City of Los Angeles. Pro Wrestling Fujiwara Gumi ran 2 successful shows in Florida a few years back, but they were pushed more toward martial arts studios and not toward pro wrestling, and not built around the Japanese competitors, and instead used Bart Valley, a local product, as the focal point of promotion. The only other attempt at running a Japanese wrestling show in the US over the last decade was an FMW show in Los Angeles in 1992 that drew a sellout of about 6,300 at the Cal State Los Angeles gym. However, only a few hundred of those attending were Japanese, and virtually the entire crowd was of Mexican heritage because El Hijo del Santo, who hadn't appeared in Los Angeles in 5 years, topped the bill, teaming with Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto. As for match quality, it runs the gamut. The women's match has 2 great workers who have declined from their peak in Hokuto and Nakano, and the 2 Mexican women, who will likely take the match down several levels. The second match has Dos Caras, who is in his mid-40s but as the recent J-Cup showed, can still be quite good when he wants to be but is inconsistent, Garza, who is the hottest young wrestler in EMLL, Wagner, who is a solid heel, and Marcus, who is overweight and not good and shouldn't be on a show of this caliber. Octagon isn't a great worker but can do enough good high spots to get by, while Dragon and Psicosis are 2 of the better workers around, and Heavy is another of those inconsistent types. Atlantis and Santo vs. Silver King and Negro should be tremendous. Conan and Aguayo vs. Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr. on paper looks terrible outside its own world where it is a main event feud. Luger vs. Saito is a bad match. Giant vs. Sting is questionable, although it's a WCW main event match. Liger Benoit, if it takes place, goes without saying that as long as it's given time will be an excellent match, and Sasuke Wright has potential to be very good as well. Fujinami and Kat are veterans who probably won't make mistakes but will probably do nothing spectacular either. And most people who have heard about Inoki and Severn vs. Fujiwara and Pillman are left shaking their heads. Pillman has real credentials but isn't pushed as a star, so his name and legit credentials mean nothing in pro wrestling. The idea of an Inoki and Severn team means a lot in Japan, and it'll mean a lot more if Severn can beat Shamrock. But it means nothing in the US, while Fujiwara, who will be 46 come showtime, is a favorite foe of Inoki's because they can do a legitimate looking match. That style is totally unfamiliar in this country, and Fujiwara is also way past his better days. Also confirmed as appearing on the show are Randy Savage, Chris Benoit, and Jushin Liger, with the latter 2 perhaps wrestling one another. There is still talk about Terry Funk appearing in a US retirement match, which would be a triangular match with one of the other 2 in the match being Sabu, but it hasn't been confirmed. From one standpoint, the historical one, having Inoki, Aguayo, Santo, Fujinami, Savage, Funk, Liger, Hokuto, Nakano, Conan, Liger, Severn, Sabu, Fujiwara, and Sasuke, big names from many different worlds and styles, all on the same bill, is both unique and impressive. Reportedly, Inoki attempted to schedule a meeting this coming week with Vince McMahon to try and get some WWF participation, although a source close to McMahon said on April 15 that McMahon was not going to meet with Inoki and that Titan wasn't going to be involved with the show. WWF has a house show scheduled for that same night at the Tampa Sun Dome. Yet another major international show taking place within the United States will be AAA's Triple Mania 4A on May 11th at the International Amphitheater in Chicago. There have been a lot of questions asking about why Chicago. AAA has run two house shows in Chicago, a 1994 show which drew about 5,200 fans and $97,000, and a 1995 show that drew 3,100 fans and $73,000, neither of which was profitable because of the high costs of running the shows. Those attendance figures pale in comparison to AAA's success in Los Angeles and what a Triple Mania could draw in most major cities in Mexico. I don't have an answer for the question other than they wanted to run the first Triple Mania ever outside of Mexico this year. On paper, the show looks like AAA's most loaded card of the year. Conan and Perro Arguello headline against Cien Caras and Pierroth Jr. in a lumberjack match. On paper, looking at the four, it doesn't look good. Pierroth is a strong heel getting heat but a bad worker, and Arguello has really slowed down since returning from his recent knee surgery but is the closest thing to a national hero in Mexican wrestling. The lumberjack stipulation, which usually detracts from a match, in this case will probably save it, as the plan is to do a match similar to the Star of Death match in Los Angeles in December, where the young hot workers all get involved using chairs, tables and ladders and attempt to duplicate that dangerous match where they did a move fest beyond imagination. The remainder of the lineup has Octagon and Ultimo Dragon and La Parka versus Eddie Guerrero and Kevin Sullivan and Jerry Estrada, managed by Woman, the Iwas Tag Team Championship match with Rey Mysterio Jr. and Supercalo versus Juventud Guerrera and Psicosis, a Four Corners tag match with teams of Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Blue Demon Jr., Torero and Pantera, Heavy Metal and Super Crazy, who is like another Psicosis, and Caras La Momia and Picudo. And opening the show will be another tag match with Halloween and Damien facing a new team from Guadalajara that I'm not familiar with. Sullivan's appearance is largely a political favor, and one would expect that match to have a storyline leading to Guerrero going babyface and breaking up with Sullivan and Woman. It also will probably be wind up being A+ for show quality, even though it'll be a negative for that particular match because the younger wrestlers will no doubt be attempting to impress with WCW Booker. Experience has shown that because the style involves so much rhythm, even though AAA's style is more of a melting pot of international styles as opposed to the traditional lucha libre style, that adding even one foreigner that doesn't know the style to a match, even if they are a great American style performer, often throws everything off and creates a match of chaotic spots. In the case of Sullivan, he hardly qualifies as a great performer either. The USWA celebrated its 1000th television show on WMC-TV in Memphis on April 13th. No special guests were brought in for the show, which featured a lot of old clips going back to 1977 when the show moved from WHBQ in Memphis to its current home. For years, and this may still be the case today, the Memphis Wrestling television show, which has aired live on Saturday mornings from the local TV studio, was the highest-rated wrestling show in the country. Back in the heyday of people watching wrestling on television and going to the matches, as opposed to what is widely believed to be the heyday of wrestling that came shortly thereafter when its popularity in many regions actually declined greatly, during the late 70s through around 1985. The Memphis television show frequently drew better than a 20 rating and at times hit a 70 share, numbers that are so ridiculous by today's standards that probably nobody that wasn't around while it was going on even believes them. During the peak of the Memphis show's popularity on CH5, it was the second most watched television show of any kind in the Memphis market, trailing only the famous primetime soap mega hit of its era, Dallas, on CBS. The history of Memphis television wrestling actually dates back to 1948, with Lance Russell coming on board in the mid-1950s. The show aired several clips from Memphis past, including an angle where Jeff Jarrett, as a teenage referee, was ambushed and destroyed by Bill Dundee and Buddy Landel, in an angle that led to the most recent legitimate sellout of the 11,000-seat Mid-South Coliseum in 1986 for a match with Jerry Lawler and Dutch Mantel versus Dundee and Landel, Lawler winning the AWA heavyweight title from Curt Hennig in 1988, a clip from the Bill Dundee versus Jimmy Valiant feud, which I believe occurred just after the peace treaty was signed between Lee and Grant, Jeff Jarrett's pro debut against Tony Falk, a clip of when Jimmy Hart named Paul Ellering the new king of wrestling during a period when Jerry Lawler was out of action with a legit broken leg, and Lance Russell's debut with the show. The top match on the show was a battle royal to create the first USWA television champion, won by Jesse James Armstrong. The cornerstones of the Memphis office over the past 20 years have been Lawler as its top star, and in the 80s, co-owner of the company, Dundee, his frequent tag partner and arch-rival, road manager Eddie Marlin, who played the television role as promoter, co-owner and promoter Jerry Jarrett, who has in recent years left the business in the hands of general manager Randy Hales, and announcers Russell, who was generally acknowledged as the top announcer in the profession during the early 80s, and Dave Brown. Major events wrestling calendar April 19th to May 19th. April 19th UWFI New Japan Osaka Furitsu Gym, Takada and Kanehara vs Chashu and Sasaki. April 19th War Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center, Fuyuki and Gedo and Jado vs Chono and Tenzan and H. Saito. April 20th All Japan Tokyo Budokan Hall, Champion Carnival Tournament Finals. April 20th ECW Philadelphia ECW Arena, Raven vs Douglas. April 22nd WCW Monday Nitro tapings Albany Georgia Civic Center, Sting and Luger vs Flair and Giant. April 26th Extreme Fighting Championships 2 pay-per-view Montreal, K. Zenobia vs Vite. April 26th Rings Osaka Furitsu Gym, Yamamoto vs Kosaka. April 28th WWF In Your House pay-per-view Omaha Nebraska Civic Center, Michaels vs Diesel. April 29th New Japan Tokyo Dome, Takada vs Hashimoto. April 29th WWF Monday Night Raw tapings Sioux City, Iowa, Michaels vs Vader. April 29th WCW Monday Nitro tapings Palmetto, Florida Manatee Civic Center. April 30th WWF Superstars tapings Des Moines, Iowa, Michaels vs Vader. May 5th FMW Kawasaki Baseball Stadium, Tanaka and Hayabusa vs Terry Funk and Pogo. May 6th WCW Monday Nitro tapings Daytona Beach, Florida Ocean Center. May 11th AAA Triple Mania 4 Chicago International Amphitheater, Conan and Aguayo vs Karas and Pierroth. May 11th ECW Philadelphia ECW Arena. May 11th All Japan Women Yokohama Bunka Gym, Kyoko and Takako Inoue vs Toyota and Shimoda. May 13th WCW Monday Nitro tapings Nashville, Tennessee Municipal Auditorium. May 16th Pancrase pay-per-view taping Tokyo Budokan Hall, Frank Shamrock vs Rutan. May 17th UFC 9 pay-per-view Detroit Kobo Arena, Ken Shamrock vs Severn. May 18th WWF Philadelphia Core State Spectrum, Michaels vs Diesel. May 18th UWFI New Japan Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center. May 18th Women's Multi-Promotional Joint Card Tokyo Ota Ward Gymnasium. May 19th WCW Slamboree pay-per-view Baton Rouge, Louisiana Riverside Centerplex, Sting vs Giant. May 19th WWF New York Madison Square Garden, Michaels vs Diesel results. April 5th McMinnville, TN, Hardcore Championship Wrestling, 140, Larry Valentine b Franklin Money, Prozac Jack b TNT, Kroll the Deathstalker b Yukon, Tony Falk b Stephen Dunn, Steve Dahl, Jack b Troy Eaton, Shane Morton b Dale Storm. April 5th Bedford, Kentucky, Ohio Valley Wrestling, Mike Samples b Knuckles Dragon, Sean V b Harry Knuckles, Vic the Bruiser b Jerry Faith, Buck Slaughter b Phantom Tragedy Samples and Danny Davis b Rip Rogers and Bruiser. April 6th St. Paul, Minnesota, Pro Wrestling America, 350 Samson the Giant b Bobby Blaze, Tommy the Freedom Fighter b Nightstalker, Nails Original b Marty Valentine, Blacktop Bully, Barry Darso, and Nightstalker DDQ Asian Assassins, Wayne Bloom and Derek Fall Guy Dukes b The Hater and Dan Jesser DQ. April 6th Columbia, Tennessee, Mid-South Wrestling, George Weingeroff b Flash Flanagan, Hickerson Brothers b Country Boys, Troy Eaton b Bobby Gordy, Mike Samples b Freddie Morton, Bunkhouse Buck b Tony Falk. April 6th Oklahoma City, Power Zone Wrestling Alliance, Super Gato NC Gambler, Chopper b Slash, Wild Maverick b Psycho, Sean Summers DDQ Bonecrusher Steve, Casey Cannon b TNT. April 7th Dortmund, Germany WWF, 7,339 Bushwhackers and Godwins b 123 Kid and Leif Cassidy and Body Down as 1 star, Savio Vega b Owen Hart DQ 2.5 stars, Justin Bradshaw b Duke Dries 1.5 star, Ahmed Johnson b Isaac Yonkem Dud Davey Boy Smith b Jake Roberts 1.5 star, Hunter Hurst Helmsley b Razor Ramon 2.5 stars, IC title Undertaker b Goldust DQ 3 stars, Bret Hart b Steve Austin 3.5 stars, WWF title, Shawn Michaels b Diesel 2.5 stars. April 7th Jeffersonville, Indiana, Ohio Valley Wrestling, Flash Flanagan b Phantom Tragedy, Sean v b Buck Slaughter, Vic the Bruiser b Bam Bam Desarn, Doug Basham b Jerry Faith, Mike Samples and Danny Davis b Vic the Bruiser and Rip Rogers.
April 8th Memphis, USWA, 630, Tony Williams b Bad News, David Haskins b Motley Cruz, Street Fight, Samantha b Miss Texas, USWA Tag Titles, Cyberpunks b Headbangers DQ, USWA Title, King Mabel b Brian Christopher DQ, Unified Title, Tommy Rich b Jerry Lawler DQ, Cyberpunk Fire, Wolfie D, b Bill Dundee, Reggie b Fine and Men on Mission b Lawler and Christopher and Moondog Spot.
April 8th Sue All Japan Women, Yukishina b Tiny Mouth, Mina Tanayama, Genki Misae b Yumi Fukawa, Mima Shimoda B. Saya Endo, Takako Inoue and Kyoko Inoue and Toshio Yamada B. Reggie Bennett and Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito, Manami Toyota B. Shaparita Asari, Yumiko Hata and Tomoko Watanabe B. Asia Kong and Atsuko Mita. April 8, Louisville, Kentucky, Ohio Valley Wrestling, Sean V. B. Knuckles Dragon, Buck Slaughter B. Jerry Faith, Mike Samples B. Phantom Tragedy, Vic the Bruiser B. Bam Bam Desarn, Danny Davis and Samples NC Rip Rogers and Vic the Bruiser. April 9, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan Women, 1600, Tiny Mouth and Yuga Shina and Yumi Fukawa and Shaparita Asari D. Genki Misae and Saya Endo and Yoshiko Tamura and Kumiko Maikawa 2000 hours, Yumiko Hatabi Atsuko Mita, Mariko Yoshida B. Toshio Yamada, Asia Kong and Mima Shimoda B. Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito 2946, WWA Tag Titles, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue B. Reggie Bennett and Tomoko Watanabe 3439. April 9, Cape Town, South Africa and NWA, Brilliant Baker B. Robert Blitz, S.A. Sting B. Pierre Mack, Nizwam Hurtley B. Danny Jordan, Abdul Kader and Prince Irshad B. Trevor and Leslie Van de Vesthuizen, Pink Panther D. Dusty Wolf, Prince of Africa B. Hammer, Danny Britz and Danny Vogues B. Giant Warrior, Butch Masters and Viking. April 10, Kyoto, All Japan, 1250 Sellout, Mighty Inoue B. Kentaro Shiga, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B. Satoru Asako, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness B. Manukia Mossman and Takao Mori, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto B. Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Aiganen, Masafuchi, The Patriot B. Johnny Ace, Stan Hansen B. Gary Albright, Kena Kobashi B. Steve Williams 2753, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa B. Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Tamon Honda 2002. April 10, Kassel, Germany, WWF, 2981, Sabio Vega B. Isaac Yankem, WWF Tag Titles, Badidanas B. Bushwhackers, Arm Wrestling, Ahmed Johnson B. Davey Boy Smith DQ, WWF Title, Shawn Michaels B. Steve Austin, Hunter Hearst Helmsley B. Duke Dries, Undertaker B. Diesel, Justin Bradshaw B. Jake Roberts, Godwins B. Leif Cassidy and 123 Kid, IC Title, Goldust B. Razor Ramon, Bret Hart B. Owen Hart. April 10, Birmingham, Alabama, WCW Saturday Night Tapings, 3,500. Non-squash results, The Giant and Ric Flair B. American Males, Eddie Guerrero B. Mr. JL, Chris Benoit B. Dave Sullivan, Belfast Bruiser B. Steve Regal DQ, Rob Parker B. Medusa DQ, Brad Armstrong B. Dean Malenko, Steiners and Nasty Boys NC Public Enemy and Road Warriors, Flair and Benoit B. Pat Tanaka and Steve Dahl. April 10, Naucalpan, AAA, 2,700 Sellout, Oriental and Tony Rivera and Mastodoni B. Goliador and Gremlin and Dr. Cerebro DQ, Big Kraken and Caras La Momia and Los Payasos Rojo and Amarillo B. Mescara Sagrada Jr., and Blue Demon Jr. and Teen Yables Jr. and Cranio, Ultimo Dragon and Pantera and Octagon B. Psychosis and Heavy Metal and Pierre Roth Jr. April 10, Kawashima, IWA, 300, Akinori Tsukioka B. Jun Nagao Ka, Kyoko Ichiki B. Emi Motokawa, Katsumi Hirano B. Takeshi Sato, Hiroshi Itakura and Keizo Matsuda B. Keisuke Yamada and Tudor the Turtle, Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke B. Leatherface and Steelface, Eddie Watts, Cactus Jack and Takashi Okano B. Tracy Smothers and Freddy Krueger. April 11, Bonn, Germany, WWF, 2,400, Duke Dries and Bushwhackers B. Isaac Yankem and 123 Kid and Leif Cassidy, Justin Bradshaw B. Savio Vega, Ahmed Johnson B. Steve Austin DQ, Owen Hart B. Jake Roberts, WWF Tag Titles, Badidanas B. Godwins, Undertaker B. Diesel, IC Title, Goldust B. Razor Ramon, Bret Hart B. Hunter Hearst Helmsley WWF Title, Shawn Michaels B. Davey Boy Smith. April 11, Toyama, All Japan, 2,450 Sellout, Yoshinari Ogawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B. Masao Inoue and Kentaro Shiga, Johnny Ace B. Manukia Mossman, Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Aigen and Masafuchi B. Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoda, Akira Tao B. Takao Mori, Stan Hansen B. The Patriot, Mitsuharu Misawa B. Jun Akiyama. April 11, Akagi, IWA, Keizo Matsuda B. Takeshi Sato Kyoko Ichiki B. Emi Motokawa, Hiroshi Itakura B. Akinori Tsukioka, Takashi Okano B. Tudor the Turtle, Leatherface and Steelface B. Keisuke Yamada and Cactus Jack, Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke B. Tracy Smothers and Freddy Krueger. April 11, Bakersfield, California, Slammers, Tyrone Little B. Kano the Islander, Jesus Zapata B. Buddy West, Hombre de Oro B. Dynamite D. Bruce Bodine B. Jeff Lindbergh, El Toro Bravo and movie star Mike B. Kano the Islander and Samoan Kid. April 12, Frankfurt, Germany. WWF 6202 Godwins and Bushwhackers B123 Kid and Leif Cassidy and Body Donnas. Justin Bradshaw B. Duke Dries, Savio Vega B. Owen Hart DQ. Davey Boy Smith B. Jake Roberts. Hunter Hurst Helmsley B. Razor Ramon. Ahmed Johnson B. Isaac Yankem. Bret Hart B. Steve Austin. IC title, Undertaker b. Goldust DQ, WWF title, Shawn Michaels b. Diesel. April 12, Glen Olden, Pennsylvania, ECW 400 JT Smith b. El Puerto Rican 1 star, Taz b. Damian Stone 1/2 of 1 star, ECW TV title 2 Cold Scorpio b. Bubba Ray Dudley 1 star, Chris Jericho b. Damian 666 2.5 stars, Bad Crew b. Gangstas Core 3 stars, ECW title, Raven b. Axel Rotten 1.5 star, Shane Douglas NC Sandman 3.5 stars, Sabu B. Billy Black 2.25 stars, Headhunters and Brian Lee B. Tommy Dreamer and Pit Bulls 4.5 stars. April 12, Saku, All Japan Women, 1850 Yoshiko Tamura B. Genki Misai Yuka Shinobi Tiny Mouth, Shaparita Asari B. Saya Endo Asia Kong and Tashio Yamada and Itsuko Mita B. Kyoko Inoue and Reggie Bennett and Tomoko Watanabe, Mariko Yoshida B. Mima Shimoda, Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito B. Yumiko Hata and Takako Inoue. April 12, Sama IWA 380, Takashi Okano B. Takeshi Sato, Tudor the Turtle B. Akinori Tsukioka, Hiroshi Itakura and Katsumi Hirono B. Takashi Okano and Keizo Matsuda, Freddy Krueger B. Keisuke Yamada, Cactus Jack B. Tracy Smothers, Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke B. Leatherface and Steelface. April 12, Mexico City Arena, Mexico, EMLO, Lady Star and Talia and La Diabolica B. Celine and Lady Apache and Princessa Blanca, Karloff Lagarde Jr. and Mocho Kota and Americo Rocca D. Mascara Magica and Yoshihiro Tajiri and Mr. Niebla, Shocker and Humberto Garza and La Fiera B. Felino, and Violencia and Rambo DQ, Hector Garza and Atlantis and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. B. El Satanico and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Apollo Dantes. April 12, Dallas Sportatorium, Confederate Wrestling Alliance, 1015 heavily papered, Bubba Monroe D. Dan Davis, Sean Summers B. Casey Cannon, Bobby Duncombe Jr. B. Dick Murdoch DQ, Sam Houston and Charlie Norris B. Guido Falcone and Vito Mussolini, Rod Price B. Chris Adams, Bo Vegas and Devin Michaels B. Al and Action Jackson. April 12, Yamagata, JWP, 500 Kanako Matoya D. Hiro Hashimoto Boyashoi Kid B. Tomoko Kuzumi, Sabu and Fuseo Naochi B. Yuki Miyazaki and Rieko Amano Candy Akutsu B. Tomoko Miyaguchi, Cutie Suzuki B. Mayumi Ozaki, Devil Masami and Hiromi Yagi and Matoya and Kuzumi B. Dynamite Kansai and Hikari Fukuoka and Miyaguchi and Amano. April 12, Childersburg, Alabama, Dixieland Championship Wrestling, 125, Brad Cooley B. Commando, Scott Armstrong B. Randy Barber, Lieutenant Nasty B. Lee Peak, Steve Armstrong Ker Sergeant Mean Mr. Tennessee B. The Bullet, Bob Armstrong DQ, David Lee NC Allen Martin. April 12, Fall Branch, Tennessee, Southern States Wrestling, Roger Anderson and Frank Parker B. Tennessee Thumper and Freight Train Ford, Nenny Christian D. Sheik White, Steve Flynn B. Stormtrooper, Equalizer B. Alan Wayne, Anderson and Parker B. Flynn and Ricky Morton, Bad Boy Buck 1 Battle Royal. April 12, Rossville, Georgia, TWA, Outpatient B. Jimmy Sharp DQ, Roger Sartain and Joel Travis B. Woody Woodchuck and Rick Justice, S. Scott James and Terry Watkins and Richie Dye B. Frankie Lee and Mr. Payne and Johnny Quaz, Randy Watkins B. Sharp DQ, Michael Collins 1 pole match. April 12, Reseda, California, Slammers, Tyrone Little B. Kano the Islander, Buddy West B. Jesus Zapata, Hombre de Oro B. Bruce Bodine, Dynamite D. B. Jeff Lindbergh, Samoan Kid and Kano B. Movie Star Mike and El Toro Bravo. April 13, Dusseldorf, Germany, WWF, 4000 Sellout, Bushwhackers B. Leif Cassidy and 123 Kid Dud, Justin Bradshaw B. Duke Dries 1 star, Jake Roberts B. Isaac Yankem 1/2 of 1 star, Steve Austin B. Savio Vega 2 stars, IC title, Goldust B. Razor Ramon 1 star, WWF tag titles, Body Donnas B. Godwins 1.5 star, Ahmed Johnson B. Owen Hart DQ 1.5 star, Bret Hart B. Davey Boy Smith 3 stars, Undertaker B. Diesel 1 star, WWF title, Shawn Michaels B. Hunter Hurst Helmsley 2 stars. April 13, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan, 2100 Sellout, Masao Inoue B. Kentaro Shiga, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness B. Manukia Mossman and Yoshinari Ogawa, The Patriot B. Ryukaku Izumida, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota B. Haruka Eigen and Mighty Inoue and Masa Fuchi, Toshiaki Kawada B Johnny Ace 2154, Hiratao B Gary Albright, Stan Hansen D Steve Williams 3000, Mitsuharu Misawa and Tamon Honda and Satoru Asako B Kena Kobashi and Jun Akiyama and Takao Omori 2556. April 13, Queens, New York Lost Battalion Hall, ECW 1100, JT Smith and Damian Stone v. Bubba Ray Dudley and Big Dick Dudley DQ 1 star, Hack Myers v. Billy Black 1 star, Eliminators v. Joel Hardgood and El Puerto Rican a 1.5 star, ECW title, Raven v. Damian 6662 2.25 stars, Shane Douglas v. Axel Rotten 2.5 stars, Taz v. Chris Jericho 2 stars, Brian Lee and Bruce Brothers b. Tommy Dreamer and Pit Bulls 3.75 stars. Sabu b. Mikey Whipwreck 3.5 stars. Gangstas 1 3-way dance over Headhunters and Sandman and 2 Cold Scorpio 3 stars. April 13, Chigasaki, IWA 600 Keizo Matsuda b. Takeshi Sato, Hiroshi Itakura b. Katsumi Hirano, Steelface b. Akinori Tsukioka, Takashi Okano b. Tudor the Turtle, Keisuke Yamada and Hiroshi Itakura b. Freddy Krueger and Tracy Smothers, Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke b. Cactus Jack and Leatherface. April 13, Middleborough, Massachusetts, IWF 750 Brian Walsh b. Mike Hollow, Joni Lee and Steve King b. Violet Flame and Violence T. Flame, Jet Scream b. Outpatient, Rick Fuller b. Tim McNeely, Smooth Operator b. Antoine Roy DQ, Fatu b. Bob Backlund. April 13, Odawara, Battlerts, 500 Sellout, Takeshi Ono b. Axe Thunder Otsuka, Katsumi Yujuda b. Satoshi Yoniyama, Takumi Chinoku and Shoichi Funaki b. Tiger Mask and Naohiro Hoshikawa, Daisuke Ikeda b. Minoru Tanaka, Carl Greco b. Yuki Ishikawa. April 13, Morristown, Tennessee, Tennessee Mountain Wrestling, Mr. Olympia b. Rick Savage, James Blevins b. David Jericho, Steve Skyfire and Olympiaker Stan Lee and Eddie Golden, 8-Ball Jones b. Bunkhouse Buck DQ, Tim Horner and Dirty White Boy DDQ Mongolian Stomper and Chris Powers. April 13, Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts, Century Wrestling Alliance, Joel Davis b. El Mascarado Corps, Omega b. Johnny Angel, Sonny C. b. Knuckles Nelson, Paul Zine b. Skull, Davis b. Big City Mike, Prankster b. Johnny Angel DQ, Buddha and Skull b. Mike and Dick Lano DQ, Fix Steamboat b. Pink Assassin. April 13, Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania, United World Wrestling Alliance, HT Rider b. Gino Caruso, Shane Gang b. Midnight Morrison and Al Jones, Tony Stallone b. John Rock, Super Destroyers b. Derek Domino and Don E. Allen, Marvelous Incorporated b. Super Destroyers DQ, Lazarus b. Fraternity Kids, Cujo b. Larry Winters, King Kong Bundy b. Doink the Clown, Jimmy Snuka b. Mike Sharp. April 13, San Augustine, Texas, World Class Wrestling Federation, 300 Texas Renegade b. Invader, Mad Dog b. Austin Rhodes, Chaz Taylor b. Dan Davis, GQ Knight b. Chance, Tugboat Taylor b. Bubba Monroe. April 13, Fresno, California, All Pro Wrestling, 212, Steve Rizzono 1 Battle Royal, Butcher McCann b. El Gallo Caliente, Joe Applebummer and Rizzono b. Jason Clay and Rick Turner, Ball Calhoun b. Corazon de Mexico, Robert Thompson b. Boom Boom Camini, Cowboy Lang and Mexicano Blanco b. Lil Nasty Boy and Frank Dalton, Michael Modest b. Matt Heisen, Demon Seed b. Robert Thompson. April 13, Warren, Michigan, Motor City Wrestling, 202, Tommy Star D. Skull Gans, Rob Avram b. Mike Legacy Killer Canarek b. Kamikaze Calhoun, Death Dealer b. Nighthawk, Rock Stevens b. Super Key No. 1, Bobby and Woody Lee b. Rico Rodriguez and Calavera Cortez DQ, Mike Kelly b. Rock Stevens to become CWF champion. April 13, Greensboro, North Carolina, Alternative Championship Wrestling, 200 Jake Spade b. Atomic Freddy, Pat Friday b. Dave Blanchard, Dale Porter d. Mr. Excellence, Rick Link DDQ Dream Warrior 2, Hollywood Dream Team b. Jackie and Bobby Fulton, Ricky Morton and Terminators b. East Coast Connection, Bone Crusher b. Wahoo McDaniel. April 13, Brighton, Tennessee, American Wrestling Alliance, Charlie Laird b. Ripley Prim, Brian Collins b. Fabulous Rocker, Randy Rocket b. Justin Williams, Bullpain and Bad News b. Rebel Connection, Blade Boudreaux b. Derek King, Williams and Terry Golden b. Donnie b. Good and Tim White, Moondog Spot b. Blackjack Daniels Corps. April 13, Springfield, Tennessee, Southeast Wrestling, 110, Puppy Love b. Akeem Knight DQ, New Dog b. Shaba Shabazz DQ, Vietnamese Express DDQ Captain Jack and Karate Kid, Ronnie Travis b. Corey Williams, Mike Durham b. Sir Mo DQ. April 13, White Georgia Power Slam Wrestling, Sergeant Poison b. Rebel Outlaw, Big Huff b. Super Assassin No. 3, Ken Arden b. Lawman No. 2, Kane and Buzzsaw b. Kissing Bandit and Bubba Humphries, Rob McBride Kerr Tim Dyer. April 13, San Francisco, Incredibly Strange Wrestling. 450 Sellout. Jesus Christ B. Televangelist. Fangoria and Vandal Drummond Split Battle Royal. Astro Girl B. El Pollo Loco. La Chingona B. Pantera Galore El Neurotico and Fangorio B. Vandal Drummond and Anarchy. Great Kaltiki B. Ku Klux Klan. Astro Zombie 2000 B. Ringo Ricardo. Roar 2000 B. Stefan de Leon. Kung Fu Cannibal B. Fangorio. Cannibal B. Unholy. April 14, Sendai Miyagi Sports Center, All Japan. 4,500 Sellout Takao Mori and Tomon Honda B. Monokia Mossman and Dan Crawford. Masao Inoue and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Yoshinari Ogawa B. Kentaro Shiga and Satoru Osako and Jun Akiyama, Ryukaku Izumida and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi B. Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoda, Kenta Kobashi B. Gary Albright, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace B. Stan Hansen and Doug Furness, Akira Tao B. The Patriot, Mitsuharu Misawa D. Toshiaki Kawada 3000. April 14, Bielefeld, Germany WWF. 3,300 Godwins B. 123 Kid and Leif Cassidy, Justin Bradshaw B. Jake Roberts, Savio Vega B. Isaac Yankem, Arm Wrestling, Ahmed Johnson B. Davey Boy Smith DQ, Hunter Hurst Helmsley B. Duke Dries, Razor Ramon B. 123 Kid, WWF Tag Titles, Body Donis B. Bushwhackers, Bret Hart B. Owen Hart, Undertaker B. Diesel, WWF Title, Shawn Michaels B. Steve Austin. April 14, Tokyo Roppongi Bell Fair, Yoshimoto Pro Wrestling, 1,150 Sellout, Abe D. Koyama, Bloody Phoenix and Fujimura B. Lady Connors and Flor Metallica, Esther Moreno and Kuga, Miori Kamiya, Bishochitl Hamada and Chikako Shiratori, Jaguar Yokota B. Lioness Asuga, Manami Toyota B. Bison Kimura. April 14, Kodama, IWA, 250, Katsumi Hirano B. Tracy Smothers, Freddy Krueger B. Keizo Matsuda, Steelface and Leatherface B. Tudor the Turtle and Cactus Jack, Akinori Tsukioka and Mr. Ganasuke and Tarzan Goto B. Hiroshi Itakura and Takashi Okano and Keisuke Yamada. April 14, Koshigaya, Battlerts, 400 Sellout Takeshi Ono B. Satoshi Oniyama, Bat B. Naohiro Hoshikawa, Shoichi Funaki B. Axe Thunder Otsuka, Minoru Tanaka B. Takamichi Inoku, Katsumi Yujuda and Yuki Ishikawa B. Carl Greco and Daisuke Ikeda. April 14, Essex, MD, Mid-Eastern Wrestling Federation, Cue Ball Carmichael B. Johnny Desire, Hack Myers B. Bodacious Pretty Boy, Mad Dog O'Malley B. Bob Starr, Quinn Nash B. Adam Flash, Lucifer B. Cat Burglar, Earl the Pearl B. Mark Schrader, Johnny Gunn 1 Triangle Match over Axel Rotten and Corporal Punishment, Lou Bradley B. Bill Wild, Ricky Blues B. Steve Corino, Bad Crew and Booty Man B. Dark Side and Damian Kane, Gun Kerr Jim Neidhart. Special thanks to Mark Taylor, Corey Van Kolk, Mike Samples, Georgian Acropolis, Rick Gillespie, James Titus, Greg John, Peggy Watkins, Chuck Laundreman, Dominic Valenti, Sarah Moore, David Milliken, Ken Doucet, Paul Sosnowski, Robin Hunt, Bruce Bennett, Kurt Schneider, Rich Palladino, Roland Alexander, Brian Hoops, Oliver Holman, Greg Klein, Brian Burkon, Peter Shar, Greg Greenland, Jesse Money, Kurt Brown. Japanese Television Rundown. March 24, All Japan. 1. Ace and Patriot beat Mossman and Amori in 6:37, and Ace pinned Mossman with the Ace Crusher. Pretty bad. Amori seems to have regressed after showing signs of promise about 2 years ago. Mossman was only in for the finish, and even in that short period it was clear he was both green and had a lot of potential. 1/2 of 1 star. 2. Hansen pinned Honda in 6:39 with a lariat. 1 1/4 stars. 3. Baba and Eigen beat Abdullah and Giant Kimala 2 when 2 pinned Eigen with a splash. Awful match, mainly comedy. Best spot was when Abdullah gave Eigen a shoulder block and he instinctively spit and the spit went into 2's face. At least it was kept short. -1/2 of 1 star. March 31. All Japan. 1. Misawa pinned Kobashi in about 2400 hours. Definitely a super match, although I'd rate it just slightly below the Misawa Tao Carnival Tournament final match from last year. Since styles are different, which makes comparisons difficult, I'd also rate it below the Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Juventud Guerrera match from Philadelphia as the best match of 1996 and on par with the recent Jushin Liger Shinjiro Otani match. A lot of new spots and a very stiff match which had some devastating moves in the right place and excellent heat. A lot of great suplexes back and forth for near falls, including Kobashi debuting a captured suplex that has been pretty much an extinct maneuver in wrestling since Akira Maeda went to a more realistic shoot style in rings. Kobashi also used Misawa's own Tiger Suplex 85. Basically the Mayumi Ozaki Tequila Sunrise or a half Nelson German suplex, and his Tiger Driver on him for near falls. Misawa would come back with his usual hard forearm blows to the side of the head. Misawa used 2 throw-out Tiger suplexes for near falls, and Kobashi even kicked out of the Tiger Driver before finally getting pinned by a flying clothesline, called in Japan a flying neckbreaker drop, off the top rope. 4 3/4 stars. April 7th. All Japan. 1. Tao and Kawada went to a 30-minute draw. They aired the last 24 minutes on television and it was an excellent match, in particular the psychology as they built the match around teasing Tao's Nadawa choke slam. He finally did one at 10 minutes on the floor, but Kawada managed to stay on the floor, and when thrown into ring, quickly roll outside the ring to avoid follow-up punishment. Tao's Nadawa off the apron to the floor is considered his killer move, and they teased that. Finally he managed to get one off the ropes, but Kawada kicked out. In the latter stages of the match, Kawada busted Tao's eardrum and there was blood streaming from the ear. Stiff match with super near falls at the end. 4 1/4 stars. EMLL. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. captured the CMLL World Heavyweight title from Apollo Dantes on April 14 at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City. Well, there may be debate about who the best World Heavyweight champion in the world is right now, Misawa or Michaels, but there shouldn't be much debate on who the worst is. The April 12 Arena Mexico main event was basically to set up the title match with Rayo and Hector Garza and Atlantis over Dantes and El Satanico and Dr. Wagner Jr. with Rayo pinning Dantes there as well. Got to see the April 5 Arena Mexico and it was probably the best EMLL show of the year. Santo vs. Felino for the Mexican middleweight strap was 4 stars and was the type of a match where the storyline and finish, Santo winning clean with a camel clutch, gave the championship an aura of prestige coming out. There was another super match on the show with Negro Casas and Fuerza Guerrera and Rambo vs. Humberto Garza, who was out of his league in this company, and Silver King and Dandy. Casas and Silver King have been working with each other for so many years that they're almost like watching Flair and Steamboat in the chemistry of how well they work together. A newcomer called Violencia debuted this weekend, and it isn't Peralta Morgan. Not sure who it is, but his gimmick is a rip-off of Psicosis, which is of course a rip-off of Liger, which puts a lot of pressure on the guy because what newcomer wants to be in a position where they'll be compared with him? Promel, Fuerza Guerrera's promotion, whose guys often work on shows with this group, at a television taping at Juan de la Barrera Gym in Mexico City, the former home of AAA, which was given to me as being on April 13, although since Vampiro was in Compton, CA on that date, this must be an incorrect date since the main was Vampiro and Angel Azteca and Fantasma vs. Universo 2000 and Mascara Año 2000 and Blue Panther. Word we got is the crowd was only about 400 for the show, about half women who came for Vampiro. AAA. The local press, and in particular Box E Lucha magazine, have been headlining with updates on the condition of Jesus Salas, Pentagon aka El Santo Negro aka Espanto Jr., who had been hospitalized after suffering total respiratory failure from mixing alcohol and drugs after an incident in the ring on March 6 in Aguascalientes. Salas, 39, who was clinically dead for 3 minutes and who survived largely because the hospital was so close to the arena, has suffered a degree of vision impairment and partial paralysis, and it certainly appears his wrestling career is over. While he still can't walk, he has regained some movement in his head, hands and legs and can't see fully but has some eyesight. The story has turned into yet another chapter in the bitter wrestling war as the magazine reported that AAA owes the hospital $5,500 in hospital bills and pretty much painted the entire promotion as having forgotten about him and going on with their business. The newspapers have also published photos of the governor of Aguascalientes and El Hijo del Santo, his longtime rival who works for EMLL, visiting him in the hospital and reported that Santo has been collecting money at the matches and has put his own money in to help pay Pentagon's bills. Kanek of UWA also talked about doing a benefit show for Salas, who spent much of his career with UWA before jumping to AAA in 1992. Kanek said he wanted to put on a benefit show but didn't want to use anyone from AAA on the show, basically intimating that they were all uncaring. Antonio Pena has been furious over the negative coverage. Not that negative coverage of AAA in the press is anything new, as Pena has been nicknamed in some circles Das Führer of wrestling after Hitler because they believe he's tried to take over the wrestling business. But in this case, Pena felt the press and his enemies went over the line by using a tragic situation for their own PR benefit and as ammunition in a war and banned Box E Lucha from all AAA arenas. Reports we've heard are that AAA paid some of Salas' medical expenses but not all. It was even reported in some circles that Conan was to blame for Salas' condition, as he gave Pentagon a sidewalk slam a few minutes before he collapsed in the ring, even though his final bump was a backdrop from La Parka which he didn't get up from. The magazine then came back in its next issue saying that in our quest to tell readers the truth about Pentagon, AAA won't let us in the arenas. While all this was going on, a second serious injury took place, this time to Minnie Frisbee, who suffered a brain hemorrhage and needed brain surgery after landing on his head taking a bump on the floor. Minnie Frisbee, who is 25, is the younger brother of Minnie's Espectrito 1 and 2. The suspensions in Tijuana were expected to be lifted this coming week. Last week the commission itself lifted 20 of the 24 suspensions, leaving only Conan, as the organizer of the show, Pierre Roth, for using foul language, Octagon and Heavy Metal, for refusing to submit to a medical examination which included drug testing, as being suspended for 3 months from Norte, California, which includes Tijuana and Mexicali. Conan is scheduled to run a tour of the area from April 25th to April 27th, although the Tijuana date and card aren't finalized at press time. Both Conan and Psicosis are working on cracked ribs. A funny note. During the La Parka vs. Jerry Estrada Mexican light heavyweight title match that aired on television on April 6th, Heavy Metal was Estrada's second and was wearing an ECW Pitbulls t-shirt. Caught the April 5th Nezahualcóyotl show and it was one of the better house shows of the year. Marabunta was simply amazing in carrying a slug like Rocky Santana to a near 4 stars match in a hair versus hair. We had the finish slightly off last week. Gallego actually threw the coffee in ref Pepe Casas' eyes, not Marabunta's eyes. Marabunta got some pin situations on Santana but no ref to count. Then Santana hit Marabunta with a suplex as the ref recovered and scored the pin. Later in the show, during the Gallego vs. Mr. Condor hair match, which was another bloodbath as has been the rule rather than the exception in this feud, Santana tried to throw coffee in Condor's eyes but the coffee went in heel ref Tarante's eyes. When he recovered, he fast counted Gallego's shoulders. Gallego was the heel in this match as this is a heel versus heel feud, and the shock of heel ref Tarantes doing this resulted in one of the biggest babyface pops anywhere this year. Cibernetico has knee ligament problems, but is expected to win the WWA heavyweight title from Pero Aguayo, or you read this, as the match takes place on April 18th, in Jalapa. All Japan. The Champion Carnival Tournament with 2 house shows remaining at press time, April 16th in Sakata and April 18th in Hiratsuka, before the finals on April 20th looks to come down to Steve Williams, Akira Tao, and Kenta Kobashi. Williams has a 6-1-3 record, or 15 points, 2 points for a win, 1 for a draw, with his only match remaining on April 16th against Takao Mori, which is a pretty sure win, so he should end up with 17. Kobashi has a 7-2-1 record, also 15 points, with his match left being on April 18th against Johnny Ace, which is by no means a sure win and he will probably need a win to reach the finals in that match. Tao has a 6-1-3 record for 15 points, with his match remaining being on April 16th against Ace, which I'd guess is a probable win but not a sure win. Stan Hansen is actually in the lead with a 7-2-2 record, 16 points, but he's got no matches remaining, so he'd need 2 of the 3 to lose or draw their remaining matches and meet Mitsuharu Misawa to lose or draw his last match to Takao Mori, which just isn't going to happen. If Williams, Kobashi and Tao all lose their finish match and Misawa wins his, Misawa vs. Hansen would be the final match, but that probably isn't going to happen. Everyone else has been mathematically eliminated, including Gary Albright, who was pinned by Hansen, Kobashi and Tao in the last week. There has already been a lot of speculation if all 3 get their win that they'll have the finals be a form of a triangular match for the first time in history, although my prediction is that Kobashi gets tripped up, either losing to more likely going the time limit with Ace, and that Tao and Williams will wrestle in the finals. I could see that one going either way, although Williams would be a slight favorite. Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada, who would have generally been considered the co-favorites going in, were both put in a must-win to survive situation in their match on April 14th in Sendai, which drew a sellout of 4,500, and they wound up going to a 30-minute draw, thereby each being theoretically eliminated, unless Williams, Tao and Kobashi all lose this week. As of April 15th, the rest of the standings were Mitsuharu Misawa 6-2-2, 14 points, Toshiaki Kawada 5-2-3, 13 points, Gary Albright 5-4-2, 12 points, Johnny Ace 3-4-2, 8 points, The Patriot 3-7-0, 6 points, Jun Akiyama 1-8-1, 3 points, Takao Mori 1-8-0, 2 points, and Tamon Honda 9-1, 1 point. All the house shows were sellouts this past week, but they were all in either very small or medium-sized arenas. April 10th in Kyoto in a 1,250-seat building in Kobashi's hometown saw Kobashi pin Williams in 27:53 with a moonsault and a throw-out German suplex. This was the first time Kobashi has ever pinned Williams in a singles match. The only other tourney match on the show saw Patriot upset Ace in 14-24. All three of these matches appeared in heavily edited form on the April 14 television show. April 11 in Toyama before 2450 saw Tao pin Amori in 8:21 with a Nadawa, Hansen pinned Patriot in 10:44 with a lariat, and Misawa pinned Akiyama in 17:55 with a Tiger driver. April 13 at Kurakuin Hall before 2100 saw Kawada pin Ace in 21:54 with a power bomb, Tao pin Albright in 15:15 with the Nadawa, and Hansen and Williams went to a 30-minute draw. April 14 in Sendai, besides the Misawa Kawada draw, saw Tao over Patriot in 15:38 and Kobashi over Albright in 14:09. April 7 TV show did a 1.7 rating, while New Japan on April 6 did a 2.7 rating. Other Japan notes. As it turned out, Abdullah the Butcher ended up signing with Takashi Ishikawa's Tokyo Pro Wrestling at a press conference on April 10 instead of joining FMW, which he had been negotiating to join, and will debut on the next tour, which begins on April 20. Because a lot of these indies work together, that doesn't necessarily mean Butcher won't work the FMW Stadium show or work FMW dates, although lately Tokyo Pro a closer alliance with IWA, which is the rival of FMW. Nevertheless, Shoji Nakamaki of Tokyo Pro has been working FMW a lot lately, so it's possible. As far as the FMW Stadium show on May 5 goes, the word we get is that it's not definite, but that they are working on a Cactus Jack vs. Sabu match, although neither was said to be confirmed, nor has even hints of this match taking place gone public in Japan. FMW has a special show on April 21 at Kurakuin Hall with Wing Kanemura and Haido and Jason the Terrible vs. Super Leather and Shoji Nakamaki and Crypt Keeper, Headhunters vs. Masato Tanaka and Katsutoshi Niyama, independent junior title with Koji Nakagawa defending against Choichi Funaki of Battlerts, and a special match with Combat Toyota vs. Jaguar Yokota. Toyota, who is retiring this year, wanted to get in the ring with all the various legends she grew up idolizing. They'll be doing an actual tour from April 29 to the May 5 stadium show, with Terry Funk and Rock and Roll Express appearing all week. Funk has singles matches with Oya, Horace Boulder and Nakagawa, and has one match teaming with Headhunters against Kanemura and Boulder and Jason. All Japan Women ran April 9 at Kurakuin Hall, drawing only 1,600 for a double main event where Asia Kong and Mima Shimoda wrestled Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito, and teased the 30-minute draw before Kong got the 3 on Toyota using the Huracan backhand punch. After the match, Shimoda asked Toyota to become her tag partner for one match, since they both started out together in the same training camp for a non-title match against the Double Inus on May 11 at Yokohama Bunka Gym. Kong wrestles Reggie Bennett on that show as well. The April 9 main event saw the Double Inus keep the WWA tag titles, beating Bennett and Tomoko Watanabe in a 3-fall match which went nearly 35-0-0. AJW will be touring the island of Okinawa April 19 to April 22, including doing a TV taping on April 21 with Toyota and Ito vs. Kong and Watanabe, Yumiko Hata defending the All-Pacific belt against Reggie Bennett, and the Double Inus vs. Toshio Yamada and Shimoda. Speaking of Hata, I'm told her UFC rules match on the March 31 big show was a shoot. Next, Kurakuin Hall is May 1 with a one-night tag tourney with a star and a younger girl, Yamada and Genki Misae, Kyoko and Tiny Mouth, formerly Mina Taniyama, Shimoda and Shaparita Asari, Hata and Kumiko Maikawa Takako, Yumi Fukawa, Mariko Yoshida, and Ri Tamada, Ito and Yugashina, and Toyota and Yoshiko Tamura. They run Kurakuin again on May 3 with Kong and Kyoko vs. Toyota and Hata on top, plus a Japanese tag title match with Tamada and Fukawa defending against Saya Endo and Mouth, and a CMLL Minis title match with Masquerada Magica defending against Ultratum Beta. May 4 in Toto will be a 4-women tournament to fill the vacant Japanese championship with Maikawa, Tamura, Tamada, and Asari. May 5 in Tokyo has a special deal with Toyota and Yamada reuniting their tag team for one match against Kong and Kyoko, plus Takako Inoue defends the IWA title against Watanabe. May 6 in Tokyo has Mita and Shimoda reuniting their team for one match against Toyota and Yoshida, plus Hata defending the All-Pacific title against Ito. Rings changed its April 26 Osaka main event from Yoshihisa Yamamoto vs. Willie Williams to Yamamoto vs. Tsuyoshi Saka. Newcomer Steelface, who teams with Leatherface in IWA, is Eddie Watts, a wrestler out of Western Canada. Tokyo Pro Tour, which starts April 20, besides Abdullah the Butcher, will have Mr. Pogo Plus from EMLL, Shocker, Astro Jr., Alcon Negro, and Mr. Niebla. On the last tour, the wrestler who tagged up with Eddie Jackie was Leroy Howard from Florida, who I believe uses the name Navy SEAL on Florida indie shows. Oleg Toktarov's pro wrestling debut with Pancrase on May 16 is expected to be against either Takaku Fuke or Ryushi Yanagisawa. USWA. The April 8 show in Memphis drew 630 fans paying $4,600. It's a double main event having Cyberpunk Fire beating Bill Dundee in the Mask vs. Van match, so he won Dundee's van. The other main event saw Men on a Mission, which now consists of Mo, Mabel and Reggie B. Fine, beat Moondog Spot and Brian Christopher, and Jerry Lawler and Brickhouse Brown re-emerged and interfered using ether on one of the faces. Even though business in Memphis remains poor, they did a strong crowd on April 9 in Louisville, $7,000, using Dundee vs. Fire as the headline match. On the 1000th TV show, which had balloons, banners and streamers commemorating it, Jeff Jarrett returned saying it was the 10th anniversary of his pro debut, and they showed clips of him in different phases of his career building up his match against Lawler for the unified title on April 15. Jarrett did a semi-heelish interview, saying that he beat Ahmed Johnson for the title, who was the person who beat Lawler for the title, and that he never lost the title. He had to vacate it when his back went out during a match with Johnson on a WWF show in Memphis. Besides Lawler Jarrett, the April 15 Memphis card had Jesse James Armstrong and Christopher and Moondogs. The partner of Larry Booker aka Spot was called Rover, facing Men on a Mission and Brown, Dundee saying he'll retire if he can't beat Fire and Fire puts up Dundee's van. Cyberpunk Ice, JC Ice, puts up his mask against Tommy Rich, Miss Texas vs. Samantha, Tony Falk vs. Yoshi Kwan, and Headbangers vs. David Haskins and Tony Williams. ECW April 13 at the Lost Battalion Hall in Queens before 1,100 fans. Paid was either $800 or $1,000 depending upon who one wishes to believe. Opener saw Damian Stone, who may have gone by the name James Stone since between Damian from AAA and Damian Kane there are too many Damian for one promotion, and JT Smith over Bubba Ray Dudley and Big Dick Dudley via DQ and a new Dudley, a black Dudley brother named Devin Dudley, the first graduate of the ECW training school, interfered attacking Smith, Stone and ref Pee Wee Moore. Hack Myers pinned Billy Black in 6:01. Eliminators beat El Puerto Ricano and Joel Hartgood in 2:08 and Gangstas did a post-match run-in which ended up with them being handcuffed and taken out of the building. Raven kept the ECW title pinning Damian at 8:30 in a decent match. Damian got over pretty well in New York doing his imitations with some of the fans, although it was reported that the majority of the fans didn't know what he was doing. Reports were as far as this weekend being his audition to become a regular. He passed his audition. Rob Van Dam was scheduled to wrestle Shane Douglas, but it was announced he wasn't there due to a broken wrist. Douglas got on the house mic and started running down Hulk Hogan, Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels and swearing and looking for competition. Blue Meanie came out to wrestle him, but before that could happen Axl Rotten showed up and used his barbed wire bat on Meanie. Douglas then pinned Rotten in 6:55 and they shook hands afterwards and Douglas said Rotten was his toughest opponent in months and led the crowd in chanting Axl. In what was called a shoot fight, Taz beat Chris Jericho in 3:17. Taz came out with a group of seconds similar to UFC, actually students from the ECW school, and they used a ref in a karate gi. The match was said to have made no sense winding up when the ref gave Bill Alfonso the key to the handcuffs. He was cuffed to Todd Gordon, and he hit Jericho with a chair and Taz choked him out, although Jericho never submitted and the ref signaled for the bell. After the match the ref choked out Gordon and Alfonso paid off the ref in the ring. Bruise Brothers and Brian Lee beat Tommy Dreamer and Pit Bulls in 11:45 of a wild match which went outside the building into the street and Lee ended up smashing Dreamer's head into a car windshield. Raven interfered and DDT'd Dreamer, who was pinned. Sabu pinned Mikey Whipwreck in 15:21 of what was said to have been a very good match, but the crowd was unappreciative of how hard both were working. The three-way dance with Gangstas, Headhunters and Sandman and Two Cold Scorpio was the same basic brawl as in Philadelphia. This time the Headhunters simply walked out and Sandman was KO'd, leaving Scorpio with both Gangstas and he was pinned in 18:57. Missy and Lady Alexander did a catfight bit. Overall the card was reported as slightly above average, with a weak first half of the card and a good second half. They also did an angle which should end up with Douglas being managed by Kimono Wainalia. Raven and Steve Richards, who is expected to undergo surgery due to the broken orbital bone near his eye before you read this, turned on Kimona. Kimona ended up with Douglas with the story that she knows all about Raven and is going to tell Douglas secrets about him that'll enable him to win the title on April 20th in Philadelphia. The turn started actually at the March 30th Philadelphia show when the Bruise Brothers held Beulah McGillicuddy and Raven was about to kick her in the stomach to cause her to miscarriage, but Kimona jumped in front to stop Raven and Raven threw her down. The time spent throwing down Kimona enabled Tommy Dreamer to make the diving save. Beulah, who on television looks to be something like 85 to 90 pounds now, is totally unrealistic at that weight of playing the part of someone who is so far along in her pregnancy. I don't know if they're going to end up doing the soap opera fake pregnancy angle as a mind game on Dreamer. But whatever they're doing, they need to do it quick because everyone who sees Beulah makes the comment that she's way too skinny to play the role they're portraying her as being. The other weekend show was April 12th in Glenolden, Pennsylvania, which drew about 400, with the highlight being a Headhunters, replacing Bruce Brothers, who were doing a benefit at their high school alma mater that night where they were basketball superstars many years ago. It was announced at the beginning of the show and refunds were offered, and Lee beating Pitbulls and Dreamer in what was reported as one of the best brawls ever in ECW. Billy Black couldn't keep up with Sabu in the semi and they only did a 2 1/4 stars match. Damien didn't get over as well in Glenolden as in New York, losing to Chris Jericho. Perry Saturn has been working on 3 cracked ribs. The first 2 shows since this group increased its exposure to several prime outlets have been widely regarded as 2 of the weaker shows in a while. They are getting upgraded on Sports Channel Philadelphia with more promos for the show and 2 Tuesday airings, both at 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. effective immediately, along with a late Monday replay and the late Friday 2 a.m. national feed. Upcoming shows include April 27th in Wilmington, Delaware, and May 18th debut in Allentown, Pennsylvania at the Old Ag Hall where WWF taped television in the early 80s. Other May dates are May 10th in Reading, May 11th at the ECW Arena, and May 17th in Glenolden, Pennsylvania. Here and there. Luthez, one of the most enduring legends in pro wrestling history, celebrates his 80th birthday on April 26th. I'm almost feeling guilty about not giving his autobiography more enthusiastic praise last week. The book is a must for anyone who is interested in wrestling history, in particular from the 1920s through the mid-1960s, and the book also has some thoughts on the present. Betty Clark, who was a woman wrestler of the 60s, passed away on April 9th at her home in Tempe, Arizona of a heart attack at the age of 53. Clark had been battling cancer the past few years. T.C. Martin's NWC returns to Las Vegas on May 17th at the Silver Nugget with Sabu vs. Kama, Honky Tonk Man vs. Virgil, and a ceremony honoring superstar Billy Graham. I'm kind of surprised to see Graham involved with a pro wrestling show, as he has turned down similar requests either to appear as a guest at live shows or on television for several groups over the past 4 years. NWC, which was on the extinct list the past several months after the fiasco when Jim Hellwig became a partner in the promotion and then disappeared before the show took place, leaving everyone high and dry, is planning on running monthly in both Las Vegas and Sacramento, starting in June. Penthouse magazine ran an article in its current mag on the upcoming Extreme Fighting pay-per-view. Basic puff pieces, since the company that owns Penthouse is promoting the show. The article said that the upcoming pay-per-view will have fights in 4 weight classes: 139 and below, 140 to 159, 169 to 199, and heavyweight. The 139 and below fight will include Alfonso Alcaraz, who won on the first pay-per-view. The only other matches listed in the article were Ralph Gracie vs. Steve Nelson, 159 pounds, Igor Zinoviev vs. Orlando Vite, 199 pounds, and Marcus Conan Silveira vs. Carl Franks, heavyweight. Since champs Zinoviev and Silveira are complete fighters while Vite and Franks are kickboxers with no ground experience, these should be easy wins for the champ. In the story they mentioned that the promoters had sued the building in New York that booted them out of their first show, and definitely pushed the unbridled brutality angle rather than attempted to tone it down. Promoter Anthony Guccione called Brooklyn politician Roy Goodman, who was instrumental in getting the first event moved, and John McCain, ill-informed fanatics who are wasting the public's hard-earned tax dollars posturing against extreme fighting instead of concentrating on genuine social ills like poverty and crime that infest our society. Even though I agree with this point, when promoters make quotes like that, it's a sure sign of sleaziness. The article said the site of the live show is being kept a secret, apparently to keep the political headaches away. There will be a Pancrase Rules show on May 11th in Boonville, Indiana with Scott Bessick, UFC, Pancrase, versus Mike Kennedy as the main event, plus Geza Coleman Jr., UFC/Michigan Pro Wrestling Independent, and Gary Myers, EFC, also on the show. Brian Adams, who wrestled as Crush in the WWF, whose most recent claim to fame was a steroid and weapons guilty plea, is currently filming a martial arts flick in Canada. There is talk of starting a professional judo league, and the only reason I'm bringing that up is because longtime pro wrestler Alan Coage, Bad News Alan, was asked to be the television color commentator. Coage was a bronze medalist in judo in the 1976 Olympic Games. NWA's running Yardville, New Jersey Imaginations on April 27th with Tracy Smothers vs. Devon Storm, Ian Rotten vs. Abdullah the Butcher and Tommy Cairo vs. Bull Payne. Paul Heyman sent word through an intermediary to Dennis Coralluzzo requesting, since one would expect a bloodbath in a Butcher vs. Ian match, they don't use the blade because he feels using it at this point will cause problems for everyone in the long run. Needless to say, almost nobody in wrestling thinks about the long run. World Class Wrestling Federation is getting on television in a lot of smaller Texas and Louisiana markets. A group called Alternative Championship Wrestling ran a show in Greensboro on April 13 and did an angle where the Fantastics, Jackie and Bobby Fulton, attacked Ricky Morton in a cage, leading to potential matches bringing Robert Gibson back. The next Pacific Coast Sports show will be May 4th in Ukiah, California. There will be a New Zealand tour of women's wrestling in July, consisting of a 6-woman round-robin tournament with Terry Power and Yoshimoto pros Bison Kimura and Chikako Shiratori among those involved. Special get well to longtime reader Chuck Costello. On the April 13th show in Compton, California, while a brawl was going on in the audience, a fan threw what appeared to have been a can of Coke at a wrestler called Poison. Several of the wrestlers went after him, and he started swinging a chair. He was then dragged out the door where he got into a fight with another wrestler. The fan was getting the worst of it when he pulled out a gun. They ended up letting him back in the building as long as he left the gun in his car. Vampiro worked the show and did a dive off a balcony. WCW. The April 15th Nitro from Charleston, West Virginia. 8,040 fans, 6,381 paying $67,152, which are phenomenal numbers considering there was a tornado watch in town at the time of the show, had more controversy behind the scenes than in front. Coming off the April 1st show where Hogan and Booty Man were booed out of Cleveland, the talk once again surfaced to turn him heel. Due to miscommunications, both Hogan and Booty then no-showed the April 3rd Birmingham WCW Saturday night tapings. Hogan sent word that he had a movie deal that would take him out of action until August, and plans were made for him to do the serious injury angle on the April 15th show and for him to be written out of all plans. There was also a lot of internal belief that using him every Monday night was a situation that would turn into diminishing or lack of returns, and to use him on occasion as a special feature. Anyway, Hogan changed his mind at the 11th hour again and not decided against the injury angle, but instead not only won a handicap match, but popped up from the Giant's choke slam and slammed the Giant and ran him off as well. This only served to make Sting and Lex Luger look that much weaker, since later in the show, they had to take the Giant's choke slam and lay there for several minutes. Hogan wanted to stick around since the movie deal isn't a sure thing. Anyway, Hogan beat Arnold Anderson and Kevin Sullivan in a horrible handicap match in 418, when he leg dropped Kevin. Hogan looked worse than a green independent wrestler with his horrible-looking offense and his inability to do figure 4 spots, both heels set up perfectly for him. After the match, where Hogan was to get 5 minutes with the manager of his choosing, he first teased he was going to clean woman's clock, then Liz, who was looking even more uncomfortable and out of place in her role by the week, and wound up throwing around Jimmy Hart, who at 55 years old, actually took better bumps than anyone on the show besides Flair. Giant showed up and choke slammed Hogan, who popped up, did a foot-to-face and body slammed Giant. Gene Okerlund then snuck up behind Hogan as if he was going to turn heel, and Hogan picked him up for a slam and then saw who it was and let him go. -2 stars. Nasty Boys beat Public Enemy in 9:03 of a street fight. It was typical ECW style. They used mainly chairs and garbage cans and gave each other a lot of stiff shots. There was no selling or psychology, but it was a wild spectacle for the first 6 minutes until they all got tired. Knobbs pinned Johnny Grunge after Grunge missed a leap off the top as Knobbs moved and went through a table. After the match, both members of PE put Sags through a table outside the ring. 2 3/4 stars. Randy Savage pinned Bobby Eaton with the elbow in 3:57, 1 1/4 stars. Sting and Luger beat Flair and Giant via DQ in 12:48 to keep the tag titles when Sting had Flair and the Scorpion and Woman threw coffee in Sting's eyes. She actually was aiming for Luger, who ducked. So they continued the tease as to whether Luger got out of the way and let Sting get hit or it just turned out that way. They teased a Flair Giant split early, but they made up. Basic Flair stuff with great crowd heat. After the DQ, Giant choke slammed Sting and Luger and left them laying while Flair covered both and counted to 3. Coming to the ring, Flair made his second pass at Steve McMichael's wife, so I'm guessing that leads to Flair being one of Kevin Green and McMichael's opponents on the June pay-per-view. 3 stars. April 22nd Nitro from Albany, Georgia is a tag title match, and I believe they are going to have the WCW title and TV title put up as well. If Flair or Luger gets pinned, they lose their strap to whomever pins them. Also Chris Benoit versus Eddie Guerrero. Devon Storm had his knee scoped due to bone chips and will be back in about 2 weeks. Nitro starts on TNT in Europe, Asia and Latin America over the next few months and is replacing worldwide in Canadian syndication. There's talk of Nitro going to 2 hours every Monday night. The idea behind it is that TNT would increase its weekly payment to WCW for the second hour, which would make WCW even more profitable, and with the added money they can acquire even more talent. It would also give them a 1 hour jump on Titan, since the hour would be in place of Thunder in Paradise. Even if 2 hours is overexposure from a wrestling standpoint, from a TNT standpoint, an hour of Nitro would do double the ratings of Thunder. Lanny Poffo is pretty much a sure thing to come in with a gorgeous George gimmick. It is 99% sure that WCW will be moving its base of operations from Atlanta to Orlando and become a regular part of one of the theme parks. They'd have a regular wrestling exhibition at the park, which would give the younger wrestlers time to perform in front of an audience to give them needed experience. Elizabeth wound up with a raise. Tony Schiavone reportedly has signed a new 2-year contract. New Japan is interested in bringing Ron Race over for training. The other 2 shows this week were April 10th in Birmingham, which was the WCW Saturday night taping, which drew 2,800 paying $30,000, and April 13th in Roanoke, that did 4,500 paying $53,000 with a Flair Savage match on top. At the Saturday night tapings, Flair and Giant beat American males, Guerrero beat JL in a cruiserweight tourney match, Benoit pinned Dave Sullivan, and they did an interview where Benoit came off looking strong and had a lot of heat with Kevin Sullivan, so it appeared Benoit will take the Pillman role. Belfast Bruiser beat Steve Regal via DQ in a tremendous match with the same crap finish when Eaton and David Taylor interfered. Colonel Parker beat Medusa via over-the-top DQ in a very short match. Brad Armstrong beat Dean Malenko in a cruiserweight tourney match, which was good. It was explained, since Malenko had already been eliminated from the tourney, that now the tourney is double elimination. They also said for the title to change hands that the champion would have to get beaten twice, which is something that will no doubt be forgotten and never mentioned again once the title gets off the ground. Making longtime jobber Armstrong, even though he's a talented wrestler, a focal point of the cruiserweight title picture, guarantees the average fan will think of it as a jobber title and it won't mean a thing. Steiners and Nasty Boys went to a no contest with Road Warriors and Public Enemy in a good match. They also taped a Benoit and Flair over Steve Dahl and Pat Tanaka match for main event. Faux pas of the week was on Worldwide. They aired a match this weekend for the title with Flair vs. Savage, taped in February in Orlando. Apparently when they did the Orlando taping, they had no idea they were switching the belt back to Flair, so the switch must have been a way to quell Flair's unhappiness at the time, since Savage came into the ring wearing the title belt. Nothing was said in the commentary to explain this embarrassing situation. They did attempt to show crowd shots so you didn't see Savage with the belt, but you still saw him take it off. They just should have joined the match in progress. The finish saw Pillman, who supposedly isn't even with the company, come off the top on Savage for a DQ, and Hogan made the save. The nameplate on the belt clearly said Macho Man. There is a storyline behind it in that Flair kept the nameplate saying that to rub it in, but since the announcers have only said it once and that was weeks ago, and they simply ignored the close-up of the belt Savage wore to the ring saying Macho Man on it, 98% of the audience must have been confused by that. They need to send Giant to New Japan for several lengthy tours a year. For one, Giant is the type of wrestler who is better if he isn't around every week. Secondly, if he works Japan regularly, he'll develop that much faster as a worker and performer. It'll also increase WCW's leverage in maintaining strong ties with New Japan, since Giant, if he goes there regularly, will get over big. Dick Slater was on a radio show in Orlando saying a bunch of silly things. He mainly talked about the days when he was a big deal. He was one of the bigger names internationally in wrestling in the late 70s. When asked about steroids, Slater said that nobody in WCW uses steroids, although they had been used in the past. The host then asked why Luger joined the company. When asked about Bunkhouse Buck, Slater said that he tore up his knee. Buck is actually now working indies in Tennessee. Nitro is ranked number 12 of all the regular weekly programs on basic cable for the season. Raw was number 13 and WCW Saturday Night was number 20. WCW Saturday Night on April 13th did a 2.5 rating, while Pro did a 1.4 and main event was preempted. Savage did a great interview on the Saturday show. Flair used the word ass on TBS and was bleeped, unlike USA, which lets WWF use that word. Eric Bischoff made a number of statements in interviews in the Miami Herald and Charleston Post-Courier over the past week. Like McMahon, Bischoff seems to be working some sort of a storyline of his own. He ripped Kevin Nash, saying reports of a $700,000 3-year deal aren't true. Nash is actually telling everyone the 3-year deal is for $780,000 per, and said he had made no deal with Nash, Nash has a deal with WCW, so why he said that is confusing, and that Nash has always had a big mouth and isn't afraid to talk before he thinks. He largely praised Brian Pillman, saying he's very talented, but said the reason Pillman has just become a hot commodity was due to people like himself, Kevin Sullivan and Arnold Anderson. He claims Savage and Hogan aren't bothered at all about the billionaire Ted skits. I wonder if anyone actually believes that. Geez, they were talking legal action at one point and now Hogan has to beat up on 8 or 9 guys at a time because he's been driven so completely out of his mind at the same time those skits started running. When asked about giving away Raw results on the air, his explanation was, because I enjoy it. Yeah, that's another break the rules kind of thing. I'm out to kind of reinvent what wrestling is. If people want me to produce a wrestling show under the same rules, same guidelines, using the same formulas that have been done for years and years, then they're going to be really upset with me because I'm not going to do that. For wrestling to grow, for us to get the attention of the masses of bodies, I'm not talking about the hardcore obsessed fan out there, but I'm talking about the people that make up that 3.0 and 3.5 rating. For me to make this fun to watch, I've got to do things that are a little outside the box, so to speak. And one of the things I like to do is break rules. And if one of the rules is don't ever acknowledge your competition, don't ever give away the results of a show that you're heads up against, then I'm going to break every rule. When asked about sitting down with Vince McMahon to settle the feud, he said Vince McMahon is an egomaniacal punk. And Vince McMahon's ego would not allow him to sit down. First of all, Vince McMahon's ego won't ever allow him to admit that I'm the one who is kicking his butt every week. He's out there trying to paint this picture that Ted Turner is beating him up. Ted Turner has so many things he has to tend to. I don't think Vince McMahon's name flashes through Ted Turner's mind more than once a year or twice a year. Even if that were the case at one point, it couldn't be the case now because those skits had to get Turner's attention in a big way weekly. Ted Turner doesn't make the day-to-day decisions about WCW. He hasn't hired anybody, hasn't negotiated any deals that I've negotiated over the last year and a half, hasn't made any decisions that have really catapulted WCW to the position we're in right now. But Vince McMahon wants the world to believe that it's a battle between him and Ted Turner. I guess he figures he can draw more sympathy by saying he gets beat up by Ted Turner than by realizing he gets beat up by Eric Bischoff. So as long as his ego and his sense of reality is as contorted as it is, I don't ever see the opportunity to sit down and discuss. As luck would have it, this appeared in the April 14th Miami Herald, and McMahon was in Boca Raton, Florida that day and saw the article. McMahon, in response through a company source, said that he couldn't believe Bischoff said those things because he doesn't even know Bischoff, and that the only time he believes he ever met him was years ago when Bischoff was in the office for an audition for a job as a TV announcer, which he didn't get. In another article, in response to McMahon's claim that WCW's steroid policy is absurd, Bischoff said, "That's very interesting coming out of a guy who uses his drug testing procedure, apparently based on what we're hearing, with selective enforcement." The rest of Bischoff's quote wound up on the cutting room floor, but he did point to the Razor Ramon coincidence. Savage will be on the Cartoon Network's Dial M for Monkey special on April 21st. WWF. Most of the crew is still in Germany for the tour. They did a Bret Hart interview late in the week which aired on the April 15th Raw, largely to quell rumors of his going to WCW. Hart even set the stage saying another wrestling company is throwing lots of money around and basically portrayed the guys who are leaving as being greedy. WWF sources claim it's not a question of whether Hart will return, only when. Those close to Hart say that after the Kuwait tour in May, there is a possibility he won't come back, and that has nothing to do with acting opportunities and that he hasn't made a decision yet. This is a weird situation because they are working the WWF storyline around reality. Hart legitimately was mad about dropping the title to Michaels and wasn't secretive in regards to his thoughts that Michaels didn't have the maturity for the position. However, things like Hart not shaking hands or storming out of the building after the Mania match were 100% storyline. There is also a possibility, in order to get him back when the time is right, that the WWF will let him take the belt again and work a lengthy program with Michaels with the belt bouncing around, which would be a compromise both sides would likely agree to. Razor Ramon and Diesel both finish up on May 19th. I believe that after the pay-per-view and TV tapings, both are only going to work the Baltimore, Philadelphia and MSG house show run May 17th to May 19th, and that's it. There is no truth to any rumors that Ramon wanted to stay and was turned down. Complete lineups for the 3 house shows are Michaels Diesel cage match, Warrior vs. Owen Hart, Bulldust vs. Ramon, Vader vs. Yokozuna, who starts back May 17th currently as a dietary clinic at Duke University, Ahmed Johnson vs. Davey Boy Smith, Body Donnas vs. Godwins, Steve Austin vs. Jake Roberts, Mark Marrow vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Bushwhackers vs. New Rockers, and Bob Holly vs. Justin Bradshaw. Vader broke his eardrum in the match with Yokozuna but will be back for the pay-per-view. Goldust blew out his knee on April 13 in Dusseldorf, Germany against Ramon and missed the April 14 show. They even gave Ramon a win over 1-2-3 Kid, which I guess shows how far Kid's stock has fallen when they won't even give him a win over a guy who is leaving. No word on the severity. Forgot to mention this, but Sable is definitely Rena Marrow, the wife of Mark, as pretty much everyone knows already. Billy Gunn returns in mid-May after being out the past few months after neck surgery. Mr. Perfect should be back, probably to feud with Shawn Michaels later this year. Pat Patterson will be moving back to Connecticut in May. WWF sources say he won't be going back to work with the WWF and that he was simply a guest at WrestleMania. WWF has a date on August 2nd at the new Molson Center in Montreal. WCW has been unable to get a date at the building, which may turn into a subject of controversy down the line since WCW is adding local stars Jacques Rougeau and Pierre Ullet. Mania did a 1.6 on April 13th and Action Zone did a 2.0. Expect Smith to get a major push and for Diana Smith to somehow be involved with it. German crowds were April 10th in Kassel doing $2,981 and $109,262. April 11th in Bonn did an estimated $2,487,523. April 12th in Frankfurt did $6,202 and $235,113. April 13th in Dusseldorf did a sellout of about $4,000 and $143,281, and April 14th in Bielefeld did about $3,300 and $120,014. Hart and Michaels received by far the biggest responses. They switched the shows around with Michaels defending against Diesel, Davey Boy, Helmsley and Austin on the tour. The best matches on the tour based on what we've heard were Austin's matches with both Hart and Michaels. Reports on the show have varied from good wrestling with great reactions to poor wrestling with weak reactions. As of April 15th, Omaha for the pay-per-view has sold 4,829 tickets, $80,200, and Sioux City for Raw had sold 2,001 tickets, $32,000. Both building being about half sold out. WWF Raw magazine had an article ripping WCW written by Vince Russo. Basic childish writing with nothing of substance. The first Shawn Michaels vs. Vader matches will be dark matches at the Raw and Superstars tapings on April 29th and April 30th. The original plan for the Ultimate Warrior Helmsley match was to be more competitive, but Warrior reportedly vehemently refused to do anything that would help Helmsley. The readers' pages. Hart Michaels. I read with great interest your dissection of the Bret Hart-Shawn Michaels match. It wasn't the accounting of the moves that interested me, but how the observer would handle the crowd's reaction to the match, such as the overall disinterest, the stampede to the concession stands, and even the booing for what was a tremendous match. I think it all can be traced to how both WWF and WCW present their style of pro wrestling. The vast majority of television matches they present are 2 to 3 minutes with a guy getting a push against an outman jobber. We'll see a few moves, a little playing to the crowd, a finish, a replay, and it's on to the next match that goes the exact same way. When the WWF presents television like this and expects people to get excited for a match that lasts 62 minutes, they are not paying attention to what they've educated their fan base to. The WWF pushes hard to the under 12 set. A common characteristic of that age group is a short attention span. The WWF has taken advantage of that by putting on short television matches, which is good business. But to then turn around and expect that same group to be into a long match isn't common sense. I was at WrestleMania. There wasn't so much booing during the main event where I was sitting as there was total silence. Part of that was because the fans knew the match was going to last a long time. However, part was because of the impatience of many of the younger fans that were sitting around me to get the match over with and get to the good stuff, the post-match fireworks, the post-match posing, etc. The tepid reaction Michaels got after winning the title wasn't because he isn't as popular as Bret Hart, although I think that's true, but because people were basically relieved the match was finally over. American fans don't react like their Japanese counterparts. Technical wrestling, scientific moves and counters in Japan are seen as an important part of building to a great finish. In the United States, they are a meaningless prelude to obnoxious pyrotechnics, long post-match celebrations. Michaels was in the ring for 6 to 8 minutes after the match and they played his theme song all the way through 4 times, and the possibility of seeing Tammy Fitch's rear end as she leaves the ring. The WWF should have presented 3 20-minute matches instead of one 60-minute match at WrestleMania. The lines at the concession stand would have been shorter and the majority of the fans would have been more interested. Sean Flanagan. Los Angeles, California. Pancrase. Out of 200-plus Pancrase matches since September 21, 1993, only 3 matches are in question as to whether they are a shoot or a work. However, in Pancrase, finishes have never been predetermined or discussed ahead of time by the 2 opponents. It is only suspicious that Wrestler A may voluntarily lose the match while Wrestler B has no idea and has gone in with the idea that it is going to be a real fight and he legitimately has won. The matches in question are: 1-star Yusuke Takaku, Fuke vs Manabu Yamada September 1, 1994 in Osaka. It is a crazy thing to do a dropkick in a shoot match, but Fuke has so much pride in the fact that he's a pro wrestler, therefore it has caused some people to doubt his performance. This match had no dropkick and he attempted no questionable moves at all. However, Fuke asked Yamada after the show, "Did you give me the match? And was my win real?" Yamada replied, "This was real and I just ran out of luck." Yamada at the time was a newcomer from professional shooting, which means he never had any pro wrestling experience and his entire fighting life was legitimate sport only. He dominated the match and Fuke had 3 lost points before Fuke won the match with a knee bar. Fuke at the time was the veteran pro wrestler and a more recognized star among the fans, though it seemed Yamada hesitated to try all of his capable attacks against star-ranking Fuke. 1-star Masakatsu Funaki vs Ken Shamrock September 1, 1994 in Osaka. This was 1 week before UFC 3 on September 9 in Charlotte. Some believe Shamrock lost this match quickly and voluntarily because he didn't want to risk any kind of an injury going into UFC, while Funaki insisted on having a real fight and refused to discuss a finish. Funaki is an official and trained with Shamrock for UFC. He knew all the body parts and weaknesses of Shamrock at the time, so many insiders believe that Funaki, who had no injuries at the time and was in very good physical condition, still had a bigger chance to win against Shamrock. 1-star Minoru Suzuki vs Ken Shamrock May 13, 1995 in Tokyo title match. Again, some believe Shamrock may have lost this match voluntarily because he had a bigger business opportunity as the top star of UFC. An important point is that Suzuki didn't know this ahead of time, so this match was not a work. The fact is that all of the top 5, Ken Shamrock, Suzuki, Frank Shamrock, Funaki and Boss Rutan, are currently at about the same level of skill and all would be capable of winning in UFC-type competition as well. As compared to the Olympic Games level of judo and wrestling, the top Pancrase fighters are at least their equals as martial artists. Pro wrestling fans should be proud of the fact that Ken Shamrock, Suzuki and Funaki all started out as traditional pro wrestlers. It is nearly impossible to ask for a work from Rutan, Frank Shamrock, Jason D. Lucia or Guy Mesger who have never experienced the traditional world of pro wrestling before. Name withheld by request. Wrestling Wars. I'm utterly appalled at the amount of total ignorance shown by you and other fans. Do you not realize that Vince McMahon is speaking the truth about Ted Turner? I'll be the first to admit I haven't always agreed with McMahon on a lot of his business practices and I know all about what he did to the smaller organizations in the 80s. Forget your petty hatred of Vince and look at the facts. Ted Turner is right now one of the most powerful men in television. If he and Time Warner merge, he would be in position to exercise control over 50% of the cable outlets in this country. Is that what you really want? Instead of laughing this off and putting your heads in the sand and calling McMahon a crybaby for attacking Turner the only way he can, look at real life. With Turner in control after the merger, he'll have more control over what you watch than Congress. That fact alone should keep you awake at night. You people should wake up to the real danger we all face from Ted Turner and Time Warner if the merger goes through. Vince McMahon is screaming and it is all falling on deaf ears. Why don't you grow up and face the cold hard truth? 6 months from now may be too late. Kimberly Nees, Scottsburg, Indiana. At this point, I'm wondering why Vince McMahon persists on continuing his desperate innocent victim act. Like many others, I was at first amused by the billionaire Ted skits, but it's time to pull the plug on them. The March 18th skit, with Ted being grilled in a mock FTC hearing, went way over the line. It appeared to me that McMahon's innermost thoughts were coming out through the mouth of billionaire Ted in that skit. And those are thoughts he'd best keep to himself. The last time I checked, the WWF was a long way from financial ruin. The MSG show drew a sellout of 17,000 plus, which was the largest house show crowd in years. The ratings on Monday night are neck and neck with WCW. House show and pay-per-view buy rates are up across the board. The storylines are no longer boring. There must be a ton of promotions worldwide that would love to accomplish what WWF has over the past few months. As much as I despise Eric Bischoff, he makes a good point in criticizing McMahon's constant whining. Vince should just keep quiet and let his television shows, house shows and pay-per-view shows do the talking for him. I thought Bischoff would get over his obsession with WWF has-beens, but I was wrong. I can't believe he brought Tiny Lister back into pro wrestling. What's next? Virgil. Shouldn't Beulah McGillicuddy be showing by now? Judging from the recent TV shows, ECW is about one stripper and a keg of Budweiser short of becoming incredibly strange wrestling. Who cares what Bubba Ray's name is? Sabu and Rey Mysterio Jr. are two of the most insane daredevils in wrestling, but they both pale in comparison to Jackie Chan. Sabu does wild dives onto ringside tables. Mysterio Jr. does 15-foot leaps off cages and ladders. Chan fell 50 feet off a clock tower to the ground, fell 45 feet headfirst onto a bed of rocks and slid down 4 stories on a pole wrapped in live Christmas lights, and lived to tell about it. Tank Abbott is better suited for pro wrestling than Ultimate Fighting. His behavior and the behavior of his inner circle of supporters makes great ammunition for politicians with nothing better to do like John McCain to make a case for banning UFC. If Medusa ever wants to regain a level of respectability above that of a mud wrestler, she needs to buy a one-way ticket to Tokyo. Ramon Lors. Flushing, New York.